So here's another little technique you might want to add to your bag of tricks. It's called bobber-dogging, and it's a combination, it's a hybrid really, of standard bobber fishing where everything's suspended and drift fishing where we're bouncing the bottom. It's exactly kind of half and half. And it seems like it's new because you're hearing it's kind of all the rage right now, but it's been around for quite a long time. It's, you know, it's just more popular these days, and it's the reason is it's very effective. It's basically what we're doing here is, instead of having our gear suspended off the bottom like we would be with a regular float, we're going to run a slinky or pencil lead, some sort of lead, to get it tapping on the bottom, yet the bobber's still up there. What this does is the bobber, when I throw it out there, kind of helps drag everything along, kind of keeps everything moving. So a couple of the advantages of this bobber-dogging technique, one is you have a visual, a strike indicator, so when you do get bit, you got something to look at, which is really helpful when you're first drift fishing, and sometimes you can't really decipher that tap-tap from the little tap-tap of a steelhead. This thing gives you something to look at. When that thing goes down, a lot of times it's a fish, so that's cool. The other thing is you can fish water that has a very irregular bottom to it. Sometimes when you're first float fishing, it's kind of hard to figure out where to set the depth of your float. Well, with this, you're tapping the bottom, so you're in the strike zone the whole time. The other thing is this bobber just kind of pulls everything along. You don't get snagged very often with this technique, which is obviously a nice bonus. The tackle companies aren't too stoked on that, but for those of us who have to buy gear, it's a pretty cool thing. And it's a real simple technique. Basically, we're just gonna throw it upstream, about 45 degrees, and let everything hit the bottom. And then, as I preach so much in the traditional bobber fishing video about the mending, that's not as important here. We definitely want to keep the line off the water, but I don't mind having a little bow in the line right behind the bobber. That kind of keeps everything moving along. Now, you have to be real careful because you have extra line on the water with this technique. So when your bobber does go down, avoid the urge just to set the hook, because all you're doing is straightening out that line. You really want to reel down until you feel it and then go ahead and set the hook. And when you're doing this, you can cover a lot of water. We've talked about the poor man's drift boat where you kind of walk with your rig. Well, you can do that too with this whole thing. You can walk as long as you want down the run. Or if you're in a stationary position, you can let everything kind of work down through you here. Then once it starts getting tight, that's when you want to start throwing a little slack into your line. When your line's directly tied to your bobber, that's kind of pulling everything up off the bottom as it swings below you. So, as I have talked about other times with traditional suspended float fishing, we want that bobber pretty much straight up and down. In this case, the top, the brightly colored part of your float, is going to be angled downstream, almost laying flat in the water. And what's happening there is your sinker's down here on the bottom, slowing the rig down, so that slows the bobber down as it drifts. And that's okay. It would be something that isn't ideal with regular bobber fishing, but with bobber-dogging, since it's a hybrid, you're okay. So yeah, don't worry about your float being straight up and down when you're bobber-dogging. If it's laying flat, it's doing its thing. Now, when you throw out and you notice it is sitting straight up and down, or even facing forward, usually what's happened is your bobber has tumbled on the cast in the air and everything's wrapped up. So if it's not laying flat or almost flat going downstream like that, reel up immediately, because you're not even near the bottom. You got something funky going on. And another little note on that bobber alignment. Again, we want that bobber laying flat in the water with the nose of it going downstream. And to achieve that, the basic rule of thumb is you're going to set your bobber stop about 1.5 times the depth of the water. So that's just kind of a loose formula, but that'll get you started. And if you notice your bobber's riding this way or straight up and down, usually that means something got tangled in the cast. A lot of times these bobbers sort of tend to tumble a little bit on the cast and the line gets wrapped around it. So if your bobber's sitting straight up or even forward, there's something wrong. Just reel it in. Don't even fish it out. Just reel it in. You're wasting time. Get it back out there. You want that thing laying flat or almost completely flat in the water. So this is one of those techniques. Again, it's not new, but it's definitely something you ought to try out. Put it in your repertoire. It's going to get you a lot of fish. It's really effective. Cover a lot of ground. Don't get a lot of snags, and you got that nice visual to get when you get bit, the bobber goes down. So give it a shot. Bobber-dogging is pretty cool.